Hello everybody and welcome to Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you are looking for TCG codes, including the latest set Pokemon Go, make sure you check out the Potown store where you can get 5% off your order using code Omnipoke. Today we finally have the full set list for Lost Abyss, as well as a couple of additional cards from the Zeraora and Deoxys battle decks. So I'm going to be going over my first impressions. I love doing these videos because I think it's really interesting to kind of think about how these cards might sort of fit into the metagame. This is going to be combined with the Dark Phantasma set that was released about a month and a half ago now, I think, in Japan, with the Hisui and Zoroark and all of that kind of stuff. And they will form our Lost Origins set in September. So not going to be available for Worlds, but this will be just after Worlds, a couple of weeks after Worlds. This set will be released and we'll be getting hands-on with these cards. The big mechanic with this set is they're bringing back the Lost Zone, which is pretty interesting, plus another, a couple of other themes here and there. So yeah, really interesting stuff. Kicking off with the trainers, of course. Yeah, and we're just going to jump straight into it, starting off with Toolbox, which is an item card that says, look at the top 7 of your deck, reveal any number of Pokemon tool cards you find there, put them into your hand, shuffle the other cards back into your deck. I think this is pretty weak in general. I think an item specific for grabbing tools isn't the strongest. We've had a couple of things like Adventure Bag and stuff in the past that's been useful. Adventure Bag picked out the exact 2 you wanted though, so that was a guaranteed 2. This could be 3, 4, but you're going to need to play a lot of tools for you to get a lot of value out of this. There are a couple of attackers in the set that do synergize with having lots of tools on your board, that kind of thing. But in general, I don't really think this is going to be strong enough or a reason to sort of play those decks, to be honest. Mirage Gate is an item card that I think is absolutely insane. You can only play this card if you have 7 or more cards in your Lost Zone. So for anyone who is unaware of the Lost Zone mechanic, it's essentially like a separate discard pile, but you can't typically recover cards from the Lost Zone. Once they're in the Lost Zone, they're stuck there for good. And there's specific ways you can get cards into the Lost Zone, which we'll go over as we're going through the different cards in the set. But yeah, so you'll use cards like this Lost Sweeper here, for example, that says put a card from your hand into the Lost Zone to use this card. You'll use these cards to get cards into the Lost Zone, and then you can use these sort of Lost Zone payoff cards like the Mirage Gate Trainer or item. So yeah, this item says search your deck for up to 2 basic energy of different types and attach them to your Pokemon in any way you like, then shuffle your deck. This is very reminiscent of B-String to me. B-String was a very, very strong item card back in the Sun and Moon era that let you power up your Ultra Beasts on when your opponent had 3 or 4 prizes remaining. So that was a bit more, arguably a bit more specific time-wise, but this takes a little bit longer to get set up because it could be quite difficult to get 7 cards into the Lost Zone. We're going to have to play around with some of these Lost Zone mechanics to work out how easy that is. There are a fair few cards that get cards into the Lost Zone, though. A couple of supporters, or a supporter, a couple of Pokemon with abilities, and this Lost Sweeper and things like that. So there's plenty of ways to get the items to get cards into the Lost Zone. We'll have to see how consistently you can do it. But I think it's not super unrealistic to be able to be Mirage Gating from like turn 2 if you're going second, probably turn 3 if you're going first, because I think you probably need to play a couple of supporters. But yeah, 2 basic energy of 2 different types makes things a little bit awkward. Obviously, having to play different types immediately leans itself to things like the dragons. We haven't had any great way of accelerating to dragons this whole time, to be honest. There is a fantastic new dragon in the set as well in Giratina. So this will definitely be the way we're powering up Giratinas, I'm pretty sure, or one of the ways we can power up Giratinas. But in general, you can actually power up a couple of other things with this. I'm sure there will be lots of different builds of Mirage Gate decks to try and power up different attackers, which would be pretty cool. Though I think just off the just sort of on the outset, I'm pretty sure Giratina looks like the strongest because Giratina looks absolutely cracked as well. But yeah, this is essentially like B-String with a different condition, but a condition that means you can start B-Stringing earlier. I don't think you can ever really do this. I don't think it's ever really starts or is useful later than B-String was, because I think if like by the time your opponent has taken 2 or 3 prizes, realistically you're probably going to have had time to put 7 cards in the Lost Zone. So it's like B-String but can be quicker, and I think very rarely slower. Yeah, the stipulation of 2 different types is a bit awkward, But I think we have a perfect attacker in Giratina, and when we get to Giratina, you'll see why. But yeah, really interesting one. Quite a scary one, to be honest, because that's some powerful acceleration. Next up, we have Lost Sweeper. Lost Sweeper is an item that says put a card from your hand into the Lost Zone in order to use this. Choose either a Pokemon tool or a Stadium card in play and put it into the Lost Zone. So not the strongest of effects. It's never going to be probably more than like a one-off. This reminds me of like a Field Blower or that kind of thing, which was very rarely more than a one-off, except for very specific circumstances. We don't have like a Garb or anything that in the format that was when Field Blower was really popular. It was only ever being played as a one-off before then. Things like Tool Scrapper are played in Intel decks, and this could definitely be a replacement to Tool Scrapper. Obviously, this gets one card, whereas Tool Scrapper gets two, and this goes to the Lost Zone, and there's not really a huge amount of ways to recover things like the stadiums or the tools. It's only like Silene from what I can remember, and things like Roseanne's backup and stuff like that. So it like putting the cards into the Lost Zone, I think will be not particularly impactful other than against decks like Mewtwo v Union and stuff like that. That being said, you might, in these decks where you want to basically build your deck around Mirage Gate, you might play something like Lost Sweeper, and just play lots of stadiums and stuff that are beneficial to you anyway. Bear in mind you can bump your own stadium with this, or get rid of your own stadium and put the same stadium back into play, because you can't bump a stadium normally if it's already in play, but you can discard your own stadium and then put another stadium back in play. And because you're lost zoning this stadium and the card, this is like a Lost Zone +2, right? So it's decent acceleration. So the decks that build around Mirage Gate could end up playing Lost Sweeper and like high stadium counts perhaps to help try and get through to that Mirage Gate breakpoint of 7 cards. There's a couple of other cards that do more if you have more than 7 as well. So we are going to be incentivized to try and get as many cards into the Lost Zone as possible. So that could be where I see it. I think this could be like a one-off in some Intel decks over Scrapper perhaps. But I don't think putting things into the Lost Zone is particularly beneficial if you're not playing the Lost Zone deck. So it kind of competes for Scrapper. Obviously, Scrapper doesn't get rid of stadiums, so it may just be better than that anyway. And I don't think a lot of the times it's going to be too bad having to Lost Zone a card to use this, because there's often sort of burnables in your hand, or things that you don't need in the mid sort of the mid to late game. I guess this is slightly more impactful. So I don't think this is too much of a stipulation, but yeah, I can't see us having too much of an impact. Outside of just the Intel decks that are already playing Scrapper might try and play this, and then the Lost Zone deck, I think. Panic Mask is a new tool that prevents all damage done to this Pokemon, done to the Pokemon this card is attached to by your opponent's Pokemon with 40 HP or less. So this reminds me of Blizzard Town. That Blizzard Town Stadium saw very, very minor play in a couple of like weird decks here and there. I think it saw playing things like Behemoth and stuff. It was never too impactful. I don't think this will be too impactful either. I don't think there's we're doing a lot of sort of two shots, so I think we're very rarely trying to put something into 40 HP range in this format. It feels like we're either two-shotting and really overextending with a two-shot, or trying to go for a one-shot. Panic Mask could be interesting for if you have a deck that doesn't quite reach the cap or the damage threshold it needs to with a Choice Belt. But if it does reach it with a Choice Belt, why would you ever play a Panic Mask over a Choice Belt? Because if you can just take the KO, I think most of the time you just want to take the KO. Could be interesting for some controlling strategies, maybe, that try and spread damage and just lock your opponent out of being able to attack with anything. A bit awkward because we have things like Scrapper, like that Lost Sweeper, which is essentially just a Hoover, by the way, like a one-man or a one-hand Hoover, which is pretty cool. Yeah, we have things like Scoop Up Net to pick up stuff so that you can't leave damage on it. We have things like Scrapper, we have things like that Lost Sweeper. We have lots of ways around this, so I don't think this is going to be too impactful overall. Chorus's Experiment is the first supporter card, and it is one of these Lost Zone synergy cards that says look at the top 5 of your deck, put 3 of them into your hand, and put the remaining cards into the Lost Zone. So anyone that remembers Sage's Training or Hapu, this is very reminiscent of those. Hapu and Sage's Training, I believe, only got 2, right? Whereas this gets 3, but to be able to get an additional card, you have to lost zone the other 2 cards, which is a bit annoying because obviously those cards are not recoverable. But if you again build your deck with that in mind and know that you're just trying to lost zone as many cards as possible, I think that's fine. I think you can essentially play like a lot of burnable cards, a lot of just draws, a lot of draw ones, a lot of things like the trekking shoes and that kind of thing, which you don't mind just lost zoning because you don't get the draw from them, but again they're not harming your strategy and you're able to still keep the relevant cards for specific instances. So yeah, I think this is a pretty good way of accelerating cards into the lost zone. It's kind of slow because it's still only 2, so it's still like you're going to need. I think realistically, if you play Chorus's Experiment turns 1 and 2, if you're going second, or 2 and 3 if you're going first, that's still only 4 cards. So you're still going to have to combine it with things like there's a Comfey and this Lost Sweeper and things like that. So it's still a little bit slow, but I think in general, it's probably will end up making some counts into the Lost Zone deck just because I think you're going to need to be able to get cards into the Lost Zone. Hopefully we'll have a pretty cool supporter as well. Chorus has a really nice supporter back in the black and white era. So, and I really like this like Lost Zone effect they've given these Lost Zone cards with the mist coming out of the art. So yeah, but yeah, pretty cool card. Really good for just drawing some key pieces. It's basically a draw 5 and discard 2, right? But yeah, it's slightly worse. But yeah, I think this will probably make the Lost Zone deck just because it is slow and obviously it's less draw than things like research and stuff. But I think you need the Lost Zone tag to be able to get the attacks going. Lady searches your deck for 4 basic energy cards. This is a reprint from Forbidden Light. I don't think this is too relevant. I think maybe things like Frostmoth and stuff might be somewhat interested in trying it out. I think also there was another. Oh, what was the? I can't remember what the other deck I thought of earlier on that Lady was kind of interesting in. I think it was one of the metal decks or something. I can't really remember, but yeah, it's not going to be super impactful. This might see some amount of play in something like the Frostmoth deck, but I think in general it's pretty weak, to be honest. We even have Bucket for the Frostmoth deck, so I'm not even convinced you'd play in that just because we already have great ways of searching energy. So yeah, pretty low impact. Thornton is a successor of Ninja Boy. It's a supporter card that lets you choose a basic Pokemon in your discard pile and switch it with one of the basic Pokemon in play. Any attached cards, damage, counters, special conditions, turns in play, and any of their effects remain on the new Pokemon. So, some pretty interesting stuff you can do with this. Ninja Boy was a really, really interesting card that I don't think ever saw as much play as it honestly should have. It was a really, really cool card. Made the backbone of a couple of decks and still kind of somewhat relevant, I think, in Expanded with Ho-Oh to an extent. I could be wrong with that. I really don't keep up with Expanded, but I think it's still like a card in some capacity. The really interesting thing you can do with this is you can swap any basic Pokemon, so things like Miltanks and stuff that can't be hit, or basically anything that you put down in the early game that maybe draws you cards or helps you dig through your deck. You can then swap this with a basic V and immediately evolve it into a V-Star. So this essentially protects you from things like boss for 2 prizes. Obviously, your Pokemon can still get bossed, which is kind of awkward, but they're only ever going to be taking 1 prize on it, which is pretty interesting. One thing that stands out to me with this is there's a new Pidgeot that we'll go over that does seem pretty interesting, but the other thing that stands out quite well is Dialga, which is pretty funny. You can just load up something like a basic. Start attaching a few energy with your metal sources to a basic metal type and not be fairly inconspicuous and say if you want to take this 1 prize, you're taking 1 prize and I'll find ways to attach later. Then you can just Thornton into the Dialga, evolve into the V-Star, and then use some sources and stuff and get a Chronos Star, which is pretty interesting because I think one of the biggest issues with the Dialga deck is Dialga's getting bossed too early or cross-switching too early because the damage output on the other attack is fairly good, but it's only really good if you're able to use it after a Chronos Star, I think, because at that point you're actually then taking another 1 shot and hopefully taking 4 prizes. So yeah, that's a pretty interesting use for Thornton. Yeah, it's a really interesting one. Another cool one is being able to build up the Reggies Build up a board of Reggies, use Reggie Gigas' ability to attach 3 energy, and then Thornton into basically any attacker you want. Primarily things like the Amazing Rares is pretty cool. I think the only one that you'd actually want to play is probably Reshiram. I think the rest of them are pretty pants. Yveltal's too expensive. A couple of them snipe, but there's way too much mana fee right now. A couple of them interact with VMAXs, but again, we're moving more towards V-Stars. So I think the majority of the Amazing Rares have actually kind of rotated themselves, but Reshiram still does 270 for 3, which is very, very good numbers. So yeah, could be an interesting one. I'm pretty sure this card is there to be broken, to be honest. It feels like it's a very, very powerful effect, and you can do some pretty cool stuff being able to just swap into any Pokemon you want. Especially given that you can then evolve them as well. It's just pretty cool. Fantina is the another Lost Zone synergy card that says you can only play this card if you have 10 or more cards in the Lost Zone. During your opponent's next turn, your Pokemon take 120 less damage from attacks of your opponent's Pokemon V. This is a fairly powerful effect, to be honest. 120 less damage is a lot less damage. That's basically like halving a lot of the V-Stars damage output, which is crazy. Obviously, you can only play this once you've got 10 or more cards in the Lost Zone. But if you get to that point where you've got 10 or more cards in the Lost Zone, you can just chain this and become very, very tanky. Which is quite interesting. I don't know whether the game goes on long enough for you to get 10 cards into the Lost Zone before you've won the game to be able to have a reason to Fantina. But if it does, I could see Fantina definitely being a one-off. We still have plenty of ways of searching things like this. So yeah, it could be a really interesting one. 120, or resistance of 120 is a lot of damage. And whilst there are plenty of attackers that aren't V Pokemon, we're still in a very V-centric meta, right? I think, in general, this probably will be a bit too slow, but I could definitely see it as like a tech in some of these different sort of V or sort of Lost Zone decks. I don't think there'll be too many Lost Zone decks, actually. I think it'll probably just end up being Giratina, to be honest. I think Mirage Gate is super powerful, but only worth building around Giratina for. Would you play it in Giratina? Maybe, but you're already having to play, I think, a good supporter, but a supporter that is not as powerful as some other supporters. And again, this is very situational, so I don't know whether you want to clog your deck too much with these sort of situational and slightly worse than average supporters just to build your strategy. But Giratina is so good it might be worth it. And Fantina heals or resists a lot of damage. So yeah, this is a difficult one to evaluate because again, it kind of depends on it really depends on how easy it is to get these cards into the Lost Zone. I think 7 for Mirage Gate is pretty doable. I think 10 will take some time. So yeah, but it definitely an interesting card for sure. Lost City is a stadium card that says when a Pokemon is knocked out, put it in the Lost Zone instead of discarding it. But all of the other cards attached to it go into the discard. So that's a pretty interesting one. It's hard to tell whether you want to play this for yourself in the Lost Zone deck, or just to be like disruptive, to be able to put it down, get a KO, and discard some resources. There's a lot of ways of recovery. Excuse me. There's a lot of ways of recovery right now. One thing that immediately stands out to me is being able to Lost City and KO a Radiant Charizard so that they can't reuse it. I think could be a pretty big interaction for decks that struggle to deal with multiple Radiant Charizards but can deal with 1 or 2. If they can deal with 1 or 2 and just combine it with a Lost City, then you can basically wipe out an attacker from your opponent pretty quickly. A lot of the attackers in decks these days are like a 4-3 count, so I think it's going to be rare that you're going to find a situation where you've completely stopped your opponent from getting an attacker out because they've run out. Because just in general, I think you have more than enough. I think a lot of decks have more than enough ways of getting more attackers. But even so, I think the interaction with Radiance is interesting. And to be honest, it might be interesting to just play this card in these decks that want to get cards into the Lost Zone and just having 1 prizes about. You could even do something like you play a board full of 1 prizes, things like Diancie, things like Miltank, all of these kinds of cards, the Comfies and stuff like that. All of these 1 prizes that essentially just act as one prize, and your opponent just takes KOs on them. You have Lost City in play, and you start filtering them to the discard. Then you're able to, when you have enough cards into the discard, you can then Thornton one of your one prizes into a Giratina, evolve it into a V-Star, and then Mirage Gate onto it, and get a Giratina out of nowhere, basically. And they can't really play around that, because all of your Pokemon are one prizes. You never need to attach an energy, because of Mirage Gate being able to just attach to, and Giratina attacks for 3, so you attach to and just attach for turn. So they can never really target your energy, which is really good. So yeah, you can just build up Giratinas out of nowhere, which is pretty crazy. You can only build up one at a time, but that's fine, I think. And yeah, you're only giving up one prize at a time as well. So that could be a very, very interesting strategy. The more I think about that, the more scary that sounds. Just playing one prizes until basically you build 2 or 3 Giratinas and just say, right, now you have an army of Giratinas to get through. I've turned all of my one prizes into 280 HP with no weakness, doing 280 damage. Yeah, that seems pretty insane. So yeah, I could see that being the backbone of this deck. Basically, one prizes, you keep Lost City in play, you just let your opponent take the first couple of prizes with Lost City in play to get a couple of supplementary cards into the Lost Zone, and then you're able to Thornton plus Mirage Gate into these monster Giratinas. So yeah, could be pretty interesting. And then finally for the energy, we have Gift Energy, which is a colorless energy, and if the Pokemon this card is attached to is knocked out by damage from opponent's attack, draw cards until you have 7 cards in hand. So it reminds me of Lucky Egg. Is this better than Lucky Energy? Probably in decks... probably not, actually. I was going to say probably in decks that play Lucky Energy that don't play things like Snorlax, but I can't think of many decks that play Lucky Energy that don't play Snorlax. Other than like... what do you call it? Other than like Blissey. And Blissey has more than enough draw because they usually have 3 or 4 Lucky Energy on them anyway, so they're drawing lots anyway. So I don't think this is going to be quite impactful enough. I think this could be a good energy just to have for like certain control archetypes, so you're still drawing. If they like Marnie you would try and KO your Snorlax, you can just attach a Gift Energy to a Snorlax and be like, okay, well I'll draw 7 with Snorlax, I'll draw up 7 with Snorlax, and even if you Marnie or Roxanne me or whatever, I guess you're not being Roxanne, but even if you Marnie me, I still have a Gift Energy attached, so I'm still drawing back up to 7 before I say go. So it could be interesting for strategies like that. I think in general, this isn't going to see too much play, but I think this could be a nice 1 or 2 of in control decks, in the same way that Lucky Energy can be here and there. So that's the trainers. Always like to look over those just to have a bit of scope before we jump into the Pokemon. This is a 100 card set, so there's quite a few Pokemon to go through. I'm going to be pretty brief with these. I will try and keep things like Cube and GLC in mind, but I can't promise I'll spot everything. But yeah, starting off with a Venonat and Venomoth line. Venomoth has the Miracle Powder attack that flips a coin. If heads, you basically choose a special condition. I don't think that's quite powerful enough, but this art is drawn by my favourite artist, so I can't ignore it. I don't think it's going to be powerful enough for GLC. I think the format can do way more broken things than this. For Cube, I think Venomoth is always a Pokemon that I find pretty interesting, and I don't think is ever used enough in Cube because I don't think there's enough good Venomoths. I don't think this is really doing much for like a high power Venomoth Cube, but 2 for 70 in a fairly mid power level Cube could be pretty interesting. Low to mid power level Cube, 2 for 70 is pretty strong. Free retreat as well, 90 HP, so it's levelable, searchable. Yeah, interesting. Not good in standard, of course. Sunkern and Sunflora. Sunflora has the brilliant beam attack for 2 colorless that says 10. That does 10, and you may discard with 3 energy cards from your hand, and it does 70 more for each card you discarded this way. So there's essentially 220 if you're discarding 3 energy. You need a way of getting the energy back. I think one of the best ways, we have things like Training Court and stuff like that. I think you're going to want to play Twin Energy with this, so probably you don't need to play any specific energy, so maybe it is just the best way of getting energy back is something like Nessa or something, which is kind of funny because this is colorless attack cost. 220 on a 2 prizer, on a 1 prizer, sorry, is pretty cool, but I don't think it's really ever going to be consistent enough to be able to actually compete because you kind of lose to things like Marnie and Roxanne and stuff in the late game anyway. You can trade up in the early game pretty nicely. This art is also amazing. You can trade up kind of nicely in the early game, but again, eventually they start evolving into V-Stars and V-Maxes, and you can't one-shot things anymore, so seems pretty poor. Similarly, I don't think this is particularly good in GLC or Cube, from what I can think. It's a pretty strong attack for GLC, but I think there's again still more broken stuff you can do with things like Venusaur and Rillaboom and those kinds of Pokemon. This is only one attachment, I guess. But yeah, seems mediocre. We have Seedot, Nuzleaf, and then a Shiftry. Shiftry, again, has these Lost Zone cards have this cool sort of Lost Zone aura coming out of the art, which is really, really nice. Fan Tornado for 1 does 50, and you can force your opponent to switch. Pretty annoying. And then Winds of Defeat does 210 for 1 energy, and you put this Pokemon and all cards attached to it into the Lost Zone. That's very, very good damage, and I think this payoff is worth it. I can't remember. I'm pretty sure. In fact, let me check. Let me do some fact checking. Here we go. Gym leader format. I want to see the ban list. Where is the ban list? How to play the ban list. Here we go. Okay, Forest of Giant Plants is banned. I thought it was, but I wanted to just make sure. Yeah, this would have been pretty cracked in GLC if we had Forest, right? But yeah, because we don't have Forest, this is way worse. In Standard, I don't think it's good enough. It's a Stage 2. I think it's obviously incredibly efficient damage, and it's almost always worth looking at these Stage 2s when they do something like this. And honestly, this gets 3 Pokemon into the Lost Zone for you. This could be like your early game sort of trying to find ways to do stuff with the Giratina deck, but it sounds pretty bad. So yeah, bad in GLC. I don't think it's maybe it's so expensive in GLC because you have to play. It's 3 slots, but 210 for 1 is a huge amount of damage. So probably not. Maybe it's good enough. I don't know. I feel really weird commenting on GLC stuff because I haven't played the format enough to know exactly what each type is capable of. I just kind of know the general strategies of a lot of types. But I find it quite hard to evaluate whether a 210 one prize that does 210 once is worth it. It's like one big blow up, right? I struggle to know whether that's worth playing, like devoting 3 slots to when you know this is only getting 1 attack because you're Lost Zoning this, so you can't get it back, and you're not able to recover it or anything. So yeah, I do find it kind of hard to evaluate things like this in GLC. But yeah, it seems like a pretty strong card, to be honest, in a slower format. Again, I don't think it's going to be impactful enough in Standard. This is a really interesting one. Amoonguss has the Prank Spores ability. This is whenever this card is discarded from your hand by the effect of your opponent's attacks or abilities, or by the effect of your opponent's item cards or supporter cards, discard all cards from your opponent's hand. So, yeah, this is kind of like it's kind of like somewhat defense against things like hand lock. It looks like the wording is kind of weird, but I read this as when this card is discarded from your is this saying when this card is discarded from your hand by the effect of your opponent's attacks or abilities? I think it has to be discarded from your hand from an attack, ability, or an item or supporter. So I don't think you can play this as like Avery protection. I think initially I don't think this line of text was included, or I think it was worded slightly differently to the point where people thought you could use this as Avery protection, but I don't think you can use this as Avery protection. And I think that makes the card a lot worse. We don't actually have that many ways of discarding cards from hand right now. It's only some like random effects. This feels really bad if you hit this off of a random effect, to be honest. If you're doing like a random, I'm going to flip 3 coins and discard a card for each coin discard a random card for each coin I flip heads. I think there's a Berserker that does that, right? And you just happen to hit the Amoonguss. You feel super sad. But I don't think that's worth playing the Amoonguss for. I think this is, again, like all of these anti-control cards, like the Barrel that we saw, and like the Hoot Hoot, and all of these kind of, the Greedent, all of these random anti-control cards. I think none of them will actually ever see play because I think their effects are way too limited, and I think Control will find ways around things like this. They will just find a way of discarding cards in a different sense from the from the top of your deck or whatever. And because this has to come from hand by the way I read this, it has to be this effect only works if it is in your hand. So if it's discarded off the top of your deck or from the board or whatever, it doesn't work. I don't think this is ever going to see play, to be honest. But it's a pretty funny effect, to be fair. I think it's quite a cool one. Durant is pretty boring, but I just wanted to point out the really cool art where there's just Durants all around. There's one falling by the looks of it. There's one climbing upside down. I think it's great. It's just searching for 2 basic energies, nothing crazy. We've got a Phantom and a Trevenant. Trevenant has the Old Tree Barrier ability, which is a very strong ability, I think. This says that if this Pokemon is knocked out by damage from your opponent's Pokemon V attack, your opponent doesn't take a prize, and then Giga Impact does 150. And this Pokemon can't attack during your next turn. I think this is actually a pretty strong effect, to be honest. A lot of this it reminds me of like a Miltank to an extent, where your opponent has to play 1 prize answers to get through Miltank. If they recover Miltank eventually, it gets a bit annoying. But people can still find ways of dealing with 1 prize Miltanks, right? The Miraculous Body Miltanks. I feel like a Quad Trevenant deck, you can't deal with that in the same way, because you're not going to have enough 1 prize answers to be able to deal with potentially 6 Trevenants, or 5 Trevenants, or 4 Trevenants, or whatever. That's a lot of Trevenants. There's a couple of ways that you can. There's obviously all the Radiant Pokemon that can like deal with this. You've got ways of dealing damage, like damage counters and stuff like that. Inteleon is still a great answer to this. But in general, I think even against things like Inteleon, they're gonna struggle to deal with 4 Trevenants, especially given that they probably only run like 1, maybe 2 Inteleon max, and maybe 1 recovery card. You can I feel like you can really pressure. You don't care about them getting Vs outright, so you can basically, just ignore their V Pokemon, deal with their Sobbles, deal with their Drizzars, and eventually they're going to be at a point where they can't deal with Trevenants, or they can deal with Trevenants, but they're not taking prizes on them, which is pretty interesting. Things like Phoebe and stuff are annoying. We have Shred attacks, all of this kind of stuff. Though I don't know whether Shred. I don't know how Shred interacts with this, because it's not an effect on the Pokemon. It's an effect on the player. So Shred might not go through this. Interesting. Need to compendium that. I don't think Shred goes through this. We'll have to look that up. But yeah, it could be an interesting deck. It's going to be pretty slow. Energy acceleration wise, it's kind of awkward. You either have to play Gardenia or something like a Cherrim, which again is kind of bad. It's presents its own difficulties. But having Inteleon as basically one of the only answers to this is kind of scary. A Quad Trevenant deck could be pretty annoying to deal with. I don't think it's ever going to be super top tier, because people will just play more 1 prize cards like they do. Or 1 prize count, or sorry, they'll play more 1 prize attackers like they do when Miltank gets more popular. Pretty sure this goes through Cancelling Cologne as well, right? Sorry, Cancelling Cologne goes through this as well, right? So there's plenty of ways around this, but this could be a fun sort of anti-meta deck that if people aren't respecting things like Trevenants and Miltanks and all that kind of stuff enough, you could steal some wins with it, which is pretty cool. Ninetales is a great art, and again, does really good damage. 2 for 120 is pretty good, as well as Sleep. I think there's a lot of cool Ninetales, so I don't know whether it would make it into Cube. And I think there's also better Ninetales in GLC, but it's a cool one nonetheless. Slugma lets you attach to itself, and Magcargo does 220, and you put all energy attached to this Pokemon into the Lost Zone. Again, very hard to evaluate in something like a GLC. I think in Standard this is, to be honest, way too slow. I think it's too hard to get the energy on, even with things like Magma Basin and Raihan and stuff. It's just too difficult, and even then 220 is a great number, but it's still not 280. 280 is basically the number we're looking to hit these days. In what am I trying to say? In Cube format, I think 220 is way too strong. It knocks out anything, and in Cubes you often have way more ways of accelerating fire energy, so you can actually probably get this going quite quickly and just have a Magcargo tearing through stuff. Admittedly, it's only got 130 HP. It's probably dealt with quite quickly, but I think it probably does too much damage for a stage 1 in Cube, where you can tune how much fire acceleration you have, but Silver's pretty strong. In GLC, I don't really know what mag cargoes are played. The only one I can think of is probably Smooth Over. Don't know whether Smooth Over is played. There's a lot of fire energy acceleration though. This could be a good like blow up option if you're able to just pop a Slugma down and basically like leave the Slugma there. Could be an interesting one for GLC. This art is incredible as well. There's a lot of great arts in this set. Delphox V has the Spooky Torch attack that lets you burn and confuse the opponent, and then Magical Fire, Fire, Colorless does 120. You put 2 energy cards, attach this Pokemon to the Lost Zone, and then you do 120 to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. So it's a 120 snipe, which is pretty good. Again, I think Fire Energy Acceleration is kind of weird right now. It's difficult to do outside of the Magma Basin. I don't think Magma Basin is particularly good, to be honest. You can do this with Magma Basin attached right hand. And to be honest, it does 120, which is a lot of damage, but there's still a lot of Manaphy around. It's not super consistent. And in general, like 120s aren't anywhere near as impactful as they used to be, because stuff just evolves into like 280s and 280 HP, and all of a sudden the 120 is a lot worse. It feels like this is best dealing with like doubled Drizzile or whatever, but basically every Inteleon deck right now is playing Manaphy anyway, just because of Greninja, so I don't think it's really worth it, to be honest. We've got a Fletchinder and a Talonflame. I think the Fletchling is down at the bottom because it's a normal type. Talonflame has Quick Dive, which is 50 for 1, which isn't a bad snipe. And then Ruthless Strike for 1 does 80 plus 80 if your opponent's Pokemon has any damage counters on it. So that's pretty strong. 160 for 1 is pretty cool. Again, shame it's a stage 2. I think there's a lot of cool Talonflames, to be honest, from what I remember. There's a few cool Talonflames at least. Again, this feels very strong for something like Cube. I feel like we're getting to the point where we're printing cards too strong for Cube now, let alone, but still too weak for Standard, which is kind of funny. But yeah, it's conditional 160, so maybe it is very good, but like you just make it on the top end. I think the majority, like there's a couple of cool Talonflames, but I think in general Talonflame is kind of weak. So, could be okay. Again, pretty efficient. This is similar to the Shiftry, where I don't know whether it's worth playing this kind of Stage 2 in your deck in GLC, because I don't know whether it's worth the bench space. But 160 for 1 is obviously super... Or deck space, sorry. But 160 for 1 is obviously very, very efficient. So, yeah. We've got a wonderful seal art. Look at his happy little face. And then a Dugong. Dugong has the Swim Freely attack, which is basically like a mini theme in the set. It does 10 damage and flip a coin if heads prevent all effects of attacks done to this Pokemon. So all of the Pokemon with Swim Freely have the same attack text. Which basically you become immune. And then you have Arctic Return for 2 energy that's 40. And you shuffle any number of water energy from your Pokemon into your deck. This does 40 for each energy shuffled this way. I'll quickly scroll down to the Finian, because this is like the centerpiece. Finian has the ability Ocean Accompaniment that says as often as you like during your turn, you may attach a water energy from your hand to one of your Pokemon that has a Swim Freely attack. So basically, you pump a load of energy onto your board, you then Arctic Return it all in, getting a KO, and then next turn you're going to try and draw into all of these energy again, attach them all with Finian, and attack again. Pretty interesting stuff. I think, again, in the same way that they kind of push these weird one-prize archetypes in every set, like the Ball Guy archetype and like Mad Party and stuff, a lot of them fall off. Mad Party actually worked for a while, but I think this one is hard to evaluate because it's actually pretty decent numbers. 40 times means you need 7 energy, but I think that's possible, to be honest. If you just have a fairly aggressive like draw engine. Whether it's Encinos, whether it's, I don't know, lots of things. I guess it's hard to draw energy. I guess it's hard to draw 7 energy whilst also playing something like a boss and stuff. Because you need, like, the best ways to draw right now are supporters. So yeah, it probably would have to be some amount of Pokemon draw. But if you can get enough Pokemon draw on the board, you can probably find your energy quite quickly. Again, you're just going to struggle with people targeting your Pokemon draw though, right? Because eventually they're going to kill your Cincinnos and you're not going to be able to draw enough cards to be able to Arctic Return for enough. I think this is the best attacker of them all though. There's a Seadra and there's a Luminion as well. But I think this is the best attacker of all 3 of them because this actually scales into decent numbers, to be honest. But I think in general it'll probably be a little bit too slow. We've got Horsey and then the Seadra. Seadra has Swim Freely, as I mentioned. And then Hydro Shot, which does, for 1 water, does 20 to one of your opponent's Pokemon for each water energy attached to this Pokemon. So you've got a sniping attack, you've got like a big blow-up attack, and then the Luminion deals... what is it? I think it's like 120. We'll get to it in a second. It's all kind of cool. It's kind of cool that the deck has different textures. You can do different attacks, but I think in general it's going to be a bit weak. Interestingly, you can swim freely a load of energy on and then evolve into the other Kingdra, and basically the other Kingdra has that ability where it lets you keep all of the energy when you get knocked out, so you can just chain Kingdras. So maybe it's a way of trying to play around with that old Kingdra, but I think that's also pretty weak, to be honest. And then the new Kingdra has Surging Current. That says once during your turn you may choose either you or your opponent. That player shuffles their hand into their deck, shuffles their hand, puts it at the bottom of the deck, and then draws 4 cards. To be fair, if you're playing Seadras, you can play like a Kingdra, and you can just target yourself immediately, like play all the energy down, swim freely all the energy, shuffle your hand in, Surging Current for another 4, play all the energy down, play your supporter, find more water energy. So it's getting a stage 2 out, which is obviously gross, but maybe because you have some amount of inbuilt draw, maybe you just have Kingdra as your draw engine, you just keep a Seadra open to be able to snipe when you want, but in general you just play Kingdra and a thin Dugongs, and you just Kingdra like 2 or 3 times, draw essentially 12 cards. You should, because you're shuffling all the energy back into the deck, you should be hitting a lot of energy. You can just swim freely the energy back on. Pretty interesting stuff. Sounds like a bit of a meme, to be honest, but seems kind of funny. And then Hydro Splash does 130. This is pretty good. I really like Kingdra. I've never really seen Kingdras played too much in Cube. I'm not sure why. Maybe they're too weak. I'm not sure. But this seems like a pretty strong Kingdra, to be honest. We've got Wailmer and Wailord. Wailord is absolutely huge. I think this is absurd. It has 200 HP for a stage 1 prizer, and it has the oversized ability that reduces the damage you take by 30. Realistically, this is like a 260 HP 1 prizer, because I think it's going to be quite difficult to one-shot this for a lot of decks, which is insane. 260 HP on a 1 prizer is really boring, especially when we also have Scoop Up Net, to be able to heal all the damage off. Even has a half-decent attack. Special Waves does 120, and if this has any special energy attached, it does 120 more. You can easily just find a way of attaching a special energy and just doing having a 240 HP or 230 HP Pokemon doing 240 every turn. Kind of funny. I think you're probably going to be using it for the tankiness more than anything, but maybe as an additional attacker in Frostmoth box or something, it's worth trying out. But yeah, this ability I think it's kind of scary, to be honest, because you can actually keep yourself. You can actually deny prizes for quite a long time, just cycling in between Wailords while you're building stuff on the bench. Finian, as I mentioned, has that Ocean Accompaniment ability, and then the Luminion also has Swim Freely and then has Waterfall for 120. Nice to do like a consistent amount of damage, but in general, I'm pretty sure it's going to be rare that you're going to use the Luminion, to be honest. We have Kyurem V. Kyurem V has Instant Freeze, which lets you attach any number of water energy from your hand to your Pokemon. Nice acceleration, but kind of slow. And then Frost Smash for 140. And then the VMAX has Ice World. Ice World is a pretty cool ability. Once during your turn, you may discard the top card of your deck. If it's a water energy, attach it to one of your Pokemon. Not the greatest acceleration. You have to pair it maybe with things like Oranguru and stuff. But free acceleration is pretty cool. And then Max Frost does 120. And discard any number of water energy attached to this Pokemon, and it does 50 more for each energy card discarded in this way. So realistically, if you discard all 3, doing 270 with a band, that's 300. With the belt, that's 300. Quite hard to chain this. You have to Melanie attach Ice World to do this again. But it's actually half decent at dealing with V-Stars, which is essentially what a VMAX has to be right now. 330 HP is on the high side as well, so quite difficult to deal with. I think in general, probably not ever going to see much play compared to things like Palkia and Ice Rider, because Palkia and Ice Rider do it for 2 energy rather than 3. But having inbuilt energy acceleration is kind of cool. I think if this were around when we didn't have things like Palkia and Ice Rider that do this bit and this bit better, this could be a very, very strong card, but I think in general, this just isn't going to be good enough compared to those two. We have Jupiter and Araquanid. Araquanid is kind of funny. It does 20 and you flip a coin. If you paralyze them and discard an energy attached to that Pokemon. Kind of annoying, but I think rarely going to be strong enough. We do have the Flip Stadium though, at least. Cramorant has the Lost Supply ability. If you have 4 cards or more in your Lost Zone, ignore all energy cards or all energy in this Pokemon's attack cost. So this can be like an early game attacker for that Lost Zone deck that I mentioned, where you just want to play 1 prizes. Yeah, I think getting 4 cards into the Lost Zone is actually pretty doable, maybe even on turn 1. And then from turn 1, you can just be doing 110 damage turn after turn. It's never going to win you the game, but starting to set stuff up, this plus the Giratina's attack, Giratina's V's second attack does 160, so that takes you to 270, which is very close to getting a KO on a lot of V-Star Pokemon. So, yeah, I think it could be a nice one or two of, maybe even 3 of. Maybe it's just your early game sort of pressure option for that V-Star deck that plays no 2 prizes until they have a full 2 prizer going. So yeah, could be pretty interesting. Obviously, pretty dead if you can't get the Lost Supply ability working, but I think the deck will be built around trying to do that, and I think getting 4 into the Lost Zone on turn 1, if you're going second, or turn 2 going first, should be pretty doable. This is kind of annoying pressure going if you're going second, and you can manage to get the Lost Supply going. 110 on turn 1 is actually quite a lot of pressure, to be honest. Glastrier has the Freeze Down attack that stops your opponent's basics from attacking next turn, kind of weak with all the switching we have. And then Wild Tackle just does 130 and 32 itself. Pretty bad. Lantern is pretty bad, but looks adorable. Rotom V has the Instant Generator ability that says once during your turn you may draw 3 cards. If you do, your turn ends. Nothing crazy. I think it's a lot weaker on something like this than it is on the Zacian. Zacian is essentially the exact same thing, but you get to attach any metal energy you find, right? So, strictly worse than Zacian, obviously. This is weaker. This has less HP than Zacian, and it's not anywhere near as an attacking threat as Zacian. So, I think in general, it's not really great. But if you're playing a Rotom V deck, you have a nice way of just not saying pass, which is cool. Scrappy Short Circuit for 2 lightning does 40 plus 40 for each tool you move from the discard pile to the Lost Zone. So this was the card that I mentioned earlier on that I said has Lost Zone or has Pokemon Tool synergy. Obviously, this is kind of one big swing. So this is probably going to be your big late game sort of swing. We have things like the Whimsicott and the Garbodor as tool options early. We have the Tool Drop, what's it called? Tool Drop Pachirisu as well. So maybe this is like a late game finisher for those kinds of decks, but those kind of decks haven't been particularly successful, so I don't think Rotom V really brings anything to them, because you don't want it early because it's just a liability. Even though it does help you draw cards, they're just going to sort of boss it. And late game, it's going to be quite hard to get these 2 lightning energy on. You're going to need to probably attach with Raihan. I think the Pachirisu deck does play things like EXP share anyway, so maybe that's true. Maybe that's not true. Maybe you can just slap an EXP share on this. And if they deal with the Rotom, they're not dealing with things like the Honchkrow and stuff. So yeah, maybe it's a nice finisher in that deck, but I think that deck's pretty bad. And Mulga lets you search for an item card, which is kind of nice. Dynamo has Call for Family, or Search for a Pokemon. Electric has Emergent Shock that lets you flip a coin when you evolve it, and on a heads you can paralyze your opponent's active Pokemon. There was a Servine that did this. It's all very, very minimal play. I don't think this is going to see any play at all, really. I think we have too many, like maybe in Control, some kind of Control style archetype. It reminds me of a bit, well, it's a bit like that Raichu that we had that Sander played. Obviously this is on a coin flip, so it's way worse. But maybe late game is kind of annoying, but I think we have way too many ways to move stuff for this to actually be too impactful. And then Electros has one of these classic do a little bit of damage, set up your next attack, so it does 10 and then 120 more during your next turn. Lively Current does then do 280, which is very, very good. But realistically, I think if the Electros gets moved, you lose it. You lose the effect. If the electric gets knocked out, you lose the effect. It's just not ever going to be good enough. It's also stage 2. We have Drowsy and Hypno. Hypno is pretty cool, psychedelic cool, searches for up to 2 stage 1 Pokemon and puts them onto your bench. You can do some kind of cool stuff, cheating stage 1s out. But because you have to play Psychic Energy, it's kind of awkward. I don't think this is going to be the way to get stage 1s out, rather than just actually playing the stage 1s, which is a shame. But yeah, the art, again, looks incredible. They've really done some great things with the art in this set. Sableye has Lost Mine. You can only use if you have 10 or more cards in the Lost Zone, but you put 12 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon any way you like. Again, maybe this is used as some late game for your Giratina Lost Zone deck. Maybe we're just building like a Lost Zone box where you have lots of attackers that do cool stuff. If you've managed to get all of these Pokemon into the Lost Zone, you've got this one that drops 12 counters is huge for 1 energy. And realistically, like if you're saying you can do this from like turn 3 or 4 maybe, that's a lot of time to place a lot of damage counters around. And placing damage counters around is way better than dealing damage because you're never wasting damage. You can always do the exact amount of damage. Plus you can also set up multiple prize KOs, which is very strong as well. So could be an interesting one to play around within that deck. I'm still pretty sure Giratina just smacking for 280 every turn is going to be better than Sableye. But regardless, could be worth having a look at. Bennett has Puppet Memorial. That says, once during your turn, you may choose a supporter card from your discard pile, reveal it, and put it into your hand. If you do, you put this Pokemon into the Lost Zone. So again, this could be a nice way of having some additional ways to get cards into the Lost Zone whilst also having additional effects. Getting a supporter back is a very, very strong effect. I don't know what supporter you'd go for, to be honest. Probably, it's hard to say you'd go for Colress's and stuff, right? Because it feels like Colress is kind of weak. But maybe it's like the combination of, because Shuppet and Bayonet go in to the Lost Zone, maybe you can Colress, so that gets 2 in there, then you Bayonet for another 2, and then you Colress again for another 2. That's 6. So it's pretty easy to find the 7th. So yeah, maybe you're just playing this. I think it's kind of slow. It's a stage 1. I don't think it's quite powerful. I don't think it's quite quick enough to actually play it. But maybe, again, it's very difficult to evaluate how many of these ways to get cards into the Lost Zone we need until we actually look at the deck and see how many ways we have and how much space we have in terms of playing the cards we want as well as playing cards that throw cards into the Lost Zone. Slurpuff is Bulk. Comfey has Flower Picking, which again is another of these Lost Zone cards that says once during your turn, this is your active Pokemon. You can look at the top 2 cards of your deck. You put one into your hand and put the other card into the Lost Zone. Again, this is great for get additional Lost Zoning just to start setting up things like Mirage Gate. I feel like the deck is all about Mirage Gate and Giratina, so I think you're going to play a couple of Comfeys. Again, it's a great 1-prizer for the strategy that I mentioned of basically just playing 1-prizers until you can Thornton into Giratina. That seems very powerful. So yeah, I think this is probably going to be a bit part player in that for sure. Mimikyu does 10 for each damage counter on all of your opponent's Pokemon, which is a lot of damage to be honest, but these attacks very rarely work, unfortunately. Indeedee lets you search your deck for a card even if you're going first, which is kind of cool. We have a brand new Dragapult line that has Dragon Launcher, which is a brilliant attack. You may discard any number of Dreepy on your bench, and for each Dreepy discarded, you get to do a 100 snipe, which is kind of funny. Again, we have way too much Manaphy right now to be able to actually pull this off, I think. Though, interestingly, you can boss up the Manaphy. Yeah, you could boss up the Manaphy, cancelling Cologne the Manaphy, and then just snipe all of the bench, so you don't even care about Manaphy. Even so, it's a 1-prize Pokemon. It's a stage 2 Pokemon. You're going to have extra Dreepies to discard, which means realistically you probably are only able to do at most 200. You can get to 300 if you want to discard all your Dreepies. I guess you can Thornton a Dreepy back and then Candy back into the next Dragapult, but then you need to get your Dreepies back as well with things like a Rescue Carrier or whatever. It's obviously a bit of a meme, but it's kind of a funny one. We've got a new Spectria that I think is pretty weak, to be honest. It's just placing a couple of damage counters and just 120 for 3. We have Aerodactyl V. Aerodactyl V has Rock Crush that lets you, or has Bite for 40 and then Rock Crush. Lets you discard an energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. And then the V-Star. The V-Star is really interesting. So Lost Dive does 240, and you put the top 3 cards from your deck into the Lost Zone. That's pretty efficient damage, and I think in this kind of deck, this is going to be one of those decks where you just have to not care about what you Lost Zone. You kind of see them as cards that were going to be on the bottom of your deck anyway, that you were never going to be able to access. Excuse me. And then you do 240 and you try and outrace them. 270 with the band, 280 with Zig Pings is a good number, but yeah, it's actually fighting. We actually have fighting acceleration, so that's kind of cool to be fair. And then Ancient Star is a very interesting ability. It says as long as this Pokemon is in play, it gains an ability with the effect your opponent's Pokemon V in play, excluding any Aerodactyls V-Star, have no abilities. So essentially, you turn yourself into a Path to the Peak. This Aerodactyl V-Star turns into a Path to the Peak. Going to be very difficult to keep track of which Aerodactyl used the Ancient Star. If there's multiple on the board, you're going to have to make sure you KO the right one and keep track of that. Turning yourself into an auto Path to the Peak is really interesting. Unfortunately, you have to leave yourself in the active, so you're exposed for a turn to just get KO'd. Grass isn't the strongest type right now, even with the acceleration it got from the latest set, but 260 isn't a difficult number to reach, to be honest. So I think it's kind of hard to build around Ancient Star, just because there's too much. You're too exposed. You're leaving yourself active with 260 HP, was just a little bit too weak. But yeah, really interesting ability. I like the idea of this. I like the idea of these V-Star powers being very unique rather than just sort of finding or doing like a big attack. To be fair, I think they've been way better than some of the old GX attacks. Some of the old GX attacks were great, but I think things like Star Power and Star Birth are kind of way cooler than just having an attack that blows something up like Charizard does, for example. So yeah, pretty cool seeing this Ancient Star ability. We have Fampi and Donphan. Donphan does 110 for 1, but you can't use the attack if you evolve this turn, so that's kind of weak. But Barracuda is really interesting. As long as this Pokemon is in play, your opponent puts any prize cards they would take into the Lost Zone instead of into their hand. Kind of annoying in terms of disruption. I don't know that you're ever going to want to actually add this card to your deck, find space for it, but Barracuda always gets pretty interesting cards, to be honest. But yeah, I don't think you actually would. I don't think this is worth it outside of maybe like Control or something. I guess Zoro can play this, but again, Zoro has way more issues right now than it doesn't have the luxury to play this right now. But yeah, pretty interesting stuff. I don't think it's quite good enough though. Hawlucha is pretty bad. Sandygast and Palossand are pretty bad. Palossand does 30 to everything, but not great. Stonejourner has Lost Shoot that does 120 for 4, and you put the top card of your opponent's deck in the Lost Zone, which is way too slow, unfortunately. Drapion V, I forgot about this card. Drapion V is hilarious. It has Wild Style. That has the ability Wild Style that says this Pokemon's attack costs colorless less for each of your opponent's Single Strike, Rapid Strike, and Fusion Strike Pokemon in play. And then Dynamic Tail for 4 colorless does 190, and you do 60 to one of your own Pokemon. This is just like a counter for Mew, right? This is them saying, okay, we're done with Mew now. This is a splashable counter for Mew. We've seen you all playing lots of these Moltres packages, this, that, and the other. Now just play one Drapion. Your opponent can't ever play more than like one Genesect down, otherwise I'm just going to Drapion Dynamic Tail for a KO. Yeah, this card is hilarious. I don't like this design at all. I think this is really, really poor design in terms of how to counter decks, but it is what it is. Drapion V-Star has the Big Bang Arms attack that does 250, but it does 10 less for each damage counter on this Pokemon. Quite difficult to accelerate the energy to this. I guess we have Dark Patch and stuff, but you're going to have to wait a turn, so anyone that sees a Drapion on the board will probably start peppering damage onto the V-Star, or onto the V in preparation for the V-Star. I guess you can save your Dark Patches and stuff to... you can put like 2 Drapions down at once. But yeah, it feels kind of awkward because you either get KO'd or you just take a hit and you're doing no damage anymore, which is kind of awkward. I think the first Drapion probably does a decent amount, and 280, obviously with the band, is very, very strong. But yeah, I don't think this is... I think we have ways of doing better stuff with Dark Pokemon. I think, obviously, this does way more damage than things like a Moltres or a Darkrai off the bat, but I think, in general, those two are just better in terms of trying to be more consistent. Because you could, again, your opponent could just sort of poke this, so you're doing maybe only 50 damage, and then you can just ignore it and deal with the other Drapion that they're starting to set up, and just leave this one on 50 HP, or leave this one doing only 50 damage and just ignore it for a while. So yeah, it seems pretty bad, to be honest. Star Hazard auto paralyze and poisons your opponent, and makes him take 3 for poison during Pokemon checkup. Again, not super impactful. Could be nice in combination with a late game Roxanne or Marnie or something to paralyze them if you need an extra turn, but seems kind of weak. We've got a Crocodile line, Sand Gang, when you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, and when this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, so this procs twice. So you basically, you discard a random card from your opponent's hand, so essentially when you evolve this, you discard a random card, and then if this is knocked out while it's your active Pokemon, you discard a random card. Pretty cool effect, but the attack is too bad for you to ever have this active and attacking anyway. Toxapex is pretty bad, does 130 if they're poisoned, but again it's a stage 1 that you need a way of poisoning out for, which is kind of awkward. Beldum searches for a card, which is kind of nice, and then Metagross has Urgent Entry, which is a brilliant ability name that lets you, if you draw this for turn from your deck at the beginning of your turn, and your bench isn't full, you can put it onto your bench, and if you do, you draw 3 cards. Kind of a cool ability, to be honest. But again, things like Top Entry never really saw great play. Top Entry didn't draw 3 cards with it, but I don't think you're really going to waste, or I don't think you really want to put a Metagross onto your bench, to be honest. Unless you're playing Metal Energy anyway, and even then Meteor Mash is kind of weak. So yeah, I think this is a really cool ability, but I don't think decks are going to play this as additional draw support. They'd just rather play more of the Pokemon they actually want, to be honest. Ferrothorn is bulk. Galarian Stunfisk is very situational, but if they have a Stadium in play, you discard 2 energy from their active Pokemon. Is quite a lot of discard, but again, pretty situational. And once they see the first Stadium, once they see the Galarian Stunfisk and they have their first Stadium go down, they're never going to play a Stadium again. Galarian Berserker V looks hilarious. Does 20 times the number of cards in your hand. I don't think that's quite good enough, to be honest. Here we are, Giratina. Excuse me, Giratina V. We're an hour in and we're getting to my favourite card of the set. I have talked too long. Giratina is a 220 HP Dragon type. No weakness, obviously, which is crazy. It makes this thing pretty tanky. Abyss Seeker, for a colourless, looks at the top 4. You choose to put them into your hand. You lost zone the other 2. So that kind of fits in with the synergy when we get to the V-Star. And then Shred for Grass Psychic Colourless does 160 and goes through all effects. So, yeah. This is actually a decent attack. It has inbuilt Shred, which means you're not worried about Miltanks and stuff like that, which is kind of correct. The energy cost is annoying, but again, with Mirage Gate, you can get there. Again, I'm pretty sure the more I think about it, the more I like the idea of not playing any Giratinas down until you Thornton into them. Maybe even playing like a really thin Giratina line, like 3-2 or something, or 2-2, and just playing so you don't end up accidentally having your 2 prizes on the board, and then just, like I say, Thorntoning into them, which is pretty cool. The V-Star has 280. Again, no weakness. And it has Lost Impact. Lost Impact does 280 for Grass Psychic Colourless, and you put 2 energy attached to your Pokemon into the Lost Zone. That's insane. 280 is nuts. It's already doing enough damage without Belt to KO V-Stars. With Belt, you KO V-Stars with Big Charm, which is crazy. And with Belt, you're able to KO Mew VMAX. So yeah, very, very strong attack. Insane damage. And again, the fact that you don't have to have any energy attached, you can just then go Mirage Gate Lost Impact from nothing is bonkers. It's absolutely insane. Yeah, I think this is a very, very powerful card. The ability Star Requiem, or the V-Star Power, Star Requiem for Grass Psychic. You can only use this if you have 10 or more cards in the Lost Zone, but if you do, your opponent's active Pokemon is now knocked out. So again, you can just like you have. I think realistically, a Giratina one Giratina can very easily take 4 prize cards. Obviously, Giratinas hitting into each other is going to mean that 280 is not tanking all the time, but against a lot of other decks, 280 is going to be tanking, which is crazy. You lost impact to take 2 prizes, you tank a hit because you have no weakness, and as long as you're not against another Giratina VSTAR, you're pretty happy with that. You tank a hit, and then you just Star Requiem. You've helped get to this 10 count because you put 2 in there. Yeah, seems very, very strong. I think this card is going to be a huge part of our metagame. And it's a Giratina, and I love Giratina. Giratina is my favourite Pokemon, so I can't wait to play this deck for sure. I think Pidgeot is one of the last interesting cards. Pidgeot has the magnificent Vanishing Wings ability. That says once during a turn, if this Pokemon is on your bench, you may use this ability. Shuffle this Pokemon and all cards attached into your deck. Very, very strong for control decks, I think. It means that they can never deck out. Probably means they have to run an active milling card now. But I think that is pretty fine because it means that you can like Pidgeot, attach an energy, attach a tool, and then Vanishing Wings, shuffle them in, and you have 3 more cards in your deck. Going to be quite difficult to stop yourself or mill yourself, or have your opponent like mill you out with that, which is pretty cool. You can just do that over and over again. Obviously, other decks can play Pidgeot and do the same thing, but if you're playing an active mill card, you can eventually mill their Pidgeot pieces, whereas decks won't. Theoretically, probably won't be playing. We don't actually have that many ways of milling cards right now, to be honest. So, yeah, it's like that's why it's kind of weird that you have to find a way of milling, I think, with the Pidgeot. But even if you don't, to be honest, it makes things a lot slower. And obviously, you kind of enter a checkmate situation where your opponent also has a Pidgeot, where you might need a milling option to get rid of their Pidgeot. But either way, just this card alone is very, very good for control. Even starting it is fine because eventually, like you can just, it's only got 1 retreat. You can just pay retreat and shuffle it in, and it's not a liability. Yeah, really, really strong card. I think very scary for control decks. The attack is pretty pants. It does 80 plus 80 if you have Stadium in play. But yeah, very impactful for some of these controlling archetypes. We have Porygon that looks at the top 4. Porygon 2 shuffles or does 20 damage for each tool in the Lost Zone. So again, we have this Lost Zone tool synergy. Don't think it's particularly strong, to be honest, but maybe worth trying to have some fun with. And then Porygon Z. Porygon Z is always an interesting one in Cube because there's so many cool ones. I don't think this one's good enough. Downgrade Beam chooses one of your opponent's evolved Pokemon and shuffles all of the evolutions into the deck. We already have ways of doing that in Cube anyway. This isn't strong enough in Standard for sure. We already have ways of doing that in Cube, like on an ability instead. Even though this shuffles in, and I think the ability one just goes to hand. You've done your damage. You don't have to waste your turn, or you waste your attack for turn devolving. So yeah, not quite strong enough, to be honest. And I think that's pretty much it. We have a Spinder that does 10 to everything and confuses. Baneri and Lopunny that are pretty much bulk. Buffalant for 3 colourless puts an energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon in the Lost Zone. Kind of annoying, but 3 energy is quite a lot, to be honest. I think you're going to struggle to get rid of all their energy like this, but maybe in combination with hammers and stuff, if you can find a way of accelerating to this, it could be a little bit annoying, but I don't think it's going to be quite strong enough. And then Fletchling. So yeah, it's been way longer than I expected it to be. This is a big set though. It's 100 cards. It's very rare that we see 100 card sets. It's usually like 80 cards. Well, not very rare, but it's one of the biggest sets that we see. In general, the more I think about Thornton, the more broken I think it is. Especially now I've kind of started to think about that Giratina idea in my head. Mirage Gate kind of wraps that all together, which is very, very good. Giratina is obviously very strong. Pidgeot I think is very good for control decks. Giratina, crazy strong, to be honest. There's nothing else that's like super good in my opinion. Drapion is obviously a splashable counter for Mew. Aerodactyl is interesting, but not quite good enough, I don't think. Comfey is going to help us with the Giratina strat. Rotom was pretty bad. I actually think the Cramorant is pretty cool the more I think about it as well in that one prize style build of the deck. I think Swim Freely isn't going to be good enough, but it's a fun one to build around. And yeah, Trevenant seems pretty interesting as well. I don't think it's going to be groundbreaking, but I think the Ultra Barrier ability is pretty annoying, to be honest. So yeah, just worth noting, there's a couple of interesting things in the Deoxys decks. The Deoxys VMAX is very, very tanky. It has 330 and reduces 30 from V-Stars and has 30 healing. Reminds me of Guardy. Guardy never saw any play, but this one probably won't see play, but is, I think, a little bit tankier, which is kind of funny. And then the V-Star does 190 and 60 snipe, which is pretty interesting, but kind of slow, to be honest, and 60 times the number of energy attached to both active Pokemon, so that could be a nice blow-up attacking against things like an Arceus or something, but in general not quite good enough. And then we have the Zeraora. Zeraora does 60 times, it has Evil Admonition, right, 60 times the number of your opponent's Pokemon that has abilities. That's quite a lot of, that's quite a good multiplier, to be honest, but again, pretty slow. Or, well, hard, like, we don't have great... we don't have great lightning acceleration. I don't think Flaffy really counts, to be honest. But yeah, it's decent. It's never going to be groundbreaking, though, I don't think. Thunderstar is a pretty interesting one, though. For 4 energy, you choose one area Pokemon 4 times. You do 60 damage to it. So it's like 4 60 snipes, but you can choose the same Pokemon. That's pretty interesting. Very flexible. This, in combination with the sniping Zeraora, the Rapid Strike one, is kind of cool. But again, I don't think either of these cards are going to be particularly impactful overall, to be honest. I think they're just too expensive, as with a lot of these deck cards often are. Camo Poncho is one that I just wanted to quickly mention, though. If the Pokemon this card is attached to is a V-Star or V-Max, whenever your opponent plays a support card from their hand, prevent all effects of that card done to this Pokemon. So this is essentially Sun and Moon Badge, but for all V-Stars or V-Maxes. Obviously, you can tool scrapper this off or whatever, and then be able to deal with it. But just worth mentioning, because I think this could actually have some amount of impact, just because Boss is so prevalent in the format. Being able to protect your V-Star or V-Max from Boss could be quite interesting. But yeah, in general, like it's countered by Tool Scrapper, which is in Dex anyway, so probably not going to be the strongest. But yeah, a kind of long-winded summary, but I think it's worth taking a look at these cards because they're really interesting. I can't wait to try this out. I think this seems absolutely broken, to be honest. I think they've really overtuned this card, but the whole one prize deck into Thornton attacking sounds kind of interesting. So yeah, thanks very much for watching. I've been Jack from Omnipoke. Let me know what your thoughts are on all the new cards down below. I think they're pretty cool. And other than that, I will see you guys in another video soon. Cheers for watching.